Before we begin today's Unveil podcast, I do want to mention that this podcast was recorded the day before Queen Elizabeth II passed away. Will and I, during this podcast, discuss some topical elements of the United Kingdom and the political situation there. At the time of recording, we did not even know that the Queen had been taken ill and was in Balmoral under medical supervision. We do not, therefore, mention Queen Elizabeth during this podcast and would absolutely have acknowledged the situation had we been aware of it at the time of recording. Regrettably, Queen Elizabeth passed away the very next day. It is ironic that during the aftermath of Queen Elizabeth's passing, I did see some of the very themes that Will and I discussed in the recording of this podcast play out across social media. I hope that if you were affected by the passing of the British monarch, that you took some time to reflect on your relationship to the people who lead, whether politically or as figureheads, our countries. And I hope that this conversation today gives you a different perspective on how to perceive leadership, and the influences that may be behind some of the things that happen within our modern world. On today's episode of the Unveil Podcast, I sit down with Unveil Podcast friend Will Rezin, and we have a conversation about the state of the world. Now that sounds very meta, but we actually use it as an on-ramp into talking about all of the things that we do in our work and our practices, both in terms of trauma and somatics, education, functional medicine, healthcare, etc. We wanted to use this conversation to talk about everything to do with how we perceive the world and what's happening, the polarization, the current events, from the lens of being people who work with humans day in, day out, and work with the struggles that humans have. We talk all about the problem, and we also offer some potential thought processes around solutions. With that, that is enough of an introduction. Please enjoy this wide-ranging and very topical discussion with Will Rezin. Okay, so welcome once again to the Unveil Podcast, Will Rezin. And in our discussions, I'm actually going to let you take it away and explore and explain to our listeners what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, you and I, we were having a little conversation like what's relevant, and we know we want to have this conversation, and we wanted to record it. We wanted to share some of our ideas with your listeners, but we thought, why not break down some of the current events in the world and talk about them through the lens of our philosophy and our understanding of humans, why people do what they do, kind of break down some of these current events. I think it could be useful for you listening.
Yeah, especially as, we do bridge continents. I obviously come from the UK, and there's been a lot happening at the moment, and I kind of get my daily updates from my mother, who fills me in because I'm not keeping track.
Yeah.
And I almost intentionally don't keep track somehow because I don't want to know. But to date this for anyone listening out of date or at a time in the future, we are in the week where the UK has just, I say elected, although we'll get into that, just appointed a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and a whole new cabinet as a result. And they are also in the midst of an impending and a growing energy crisis is what it's being called. And in translation, that essentially means a rapid increase, an exponential increase in all energy prices, electricity, gas, and just the shocking impact that is going to have. And it isn't just on standard of living. We can talk about that from an inflation perspective and standards of living being challenged. This is bills going up by hundreds of %.
Yeah.
And I think my dad said to me this week that his energy bill is going to be £500 a month.
My God.
And he's got an electric car, but that used to cost £8 to get to full charge, and now it's going to be hundreds and hundreds. And it's just like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And then the consequential narrative that happens in the news and the media.
The polarization between different parties or different factions.
Yeah, precisely. And it isn't that, and we kind of started with this conversation, and it's not happening here. I look at the gas prices when I go and fill up my car, they're going down. I can see that happen. And I know why. The US has stockpiles, and there is, the moment this started to happen, Biden released a load of gas into the market. Oh, okay. But what is actually happening? Are we a global population? Are we siloing down into our individual nations?
Yeah. Well, and we're seeing some of the energy stuff hitting California here in the United States, and I think I just read parts of Canada as well.
Yeah.
Um, and inflation everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And what's underneath all of this,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
right? And through my lens, when I'm looking at this stuff in the world, I'm looking at, wow, look at how traumatized the world is. Look at how these people just don't. They're really lacking a sense of self-awareness.
Mm.
And it's not through any fault of theirs usually
Mm-hmm.
either. It's a byproduct of the sickness that is our cultures.
Mm.
Really, and it's in different cultures in different ways, but there's still a lack of self-awareness and a lack of cultural awareness or awareness of community.
Community, I think, is the thing. It's like we've lost the need to converse on a level playing field.
Yeah.
We just stand at opposite sides and yell at each other, it seems to me.
Yeah. And that's what happens when people are afraid. And we don't have the skills necessary to meet charged or emotional situations.
That's interesting. Can you speak to that for a moment? Because I think that it's easy for us to point to the problem, but I would like to point to the problem as we're pointing to the solutions as well. Because emotional, what would we call it? Skills, emotional.
I guess an EQ, like
Right.
emotional quotient, but like, yeah, my skills to be with my emotions or to be with others when they're experiencing emotions. What do I do? Do I get angry? Do I get scared? Do I respond by trying to get away from the emotion? Do I respond by criticizing somebody else for experiencing an emotion? What happens inside of me?
Sure.
And do I have the skills? Like, have we been taught? No, most of us have not been taught. Our cultures don't really support us to experience emotions and to be in that emotional experience.
And it's so interesting because I think it's getting worse.
Yeah, I do too.
I mean, have you ever seen Prime Minister's Question Time? Have you ever seen?
No, I haven't.
So for all of our US listeners, Prime Minister's Question Time is basically two sides of the House of Commons yelling at each other. It's literally what happens. And there is catcalling and there's like actually yelling. But I was talking with my mum this morning. We were just reflecting, and it used to actually be that plus civilized conversation. So there was actually communication happening at the ballot boxes. There were ideas being shared. There was legitimate objections being raised. There was the conversation to try and come to a solution.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like there is no conversation. There is just people begging other people to make a decision, and seemingly yes, factions, but also no legitimate opposition. I mean, I think this person who's just been voted in the UK, the meme that's going around is it's Liz Truss being appointed is like when Apple added the U2 album to Apple Music and nobody really wanted it, but nobody had a choice.
Yeah.
And it says so much. It's like best of the bad bunch.
Yeah. Well, I think government has it's grown to a point in size where well, I could say that from the perspective of a United States citizen. I don't know that that's true in other parts of the world. I mean, the government in the country where you came from is much older than ours. But I think that we are in a weird place in history right now where I don't know, the influence. I don't even actually want to say that. It's not necessarily influence. It's having a logical argument rather than an emotionally charged or sensationalized conversation. Like having real argument about things, intellectual debate seems to be a thing of the past.
Yeah.
And that was something that was really helpful for us as human beings. When we valued our ability to be in an intellectual discourse where we could hold different opinions, where we could be charged about them and emotional about them, yet we weren't resorting to name calling or tearing a person down, their character structure and things like that. We were just debating the differences. We would get somewhere in that. But we're not really getting anywhere right now. Just digging our heels in, or the two sides are digging their heels in.
And I think it's interesting what you say about, pulling apart someone's character structure. It feels like that's how we argue these days.
Yeah.
It's you've said something I disagree with, you are a terrible human being,
right.
Not you've said something I disagree with, full stop.
Right.
Or can we talk about it?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of that shows our maturity as humans. Like as people, are we maturing or are we learning the skills necessary to be in these kinds of debates?
Mm, mm. And I guess we don't teach it anymore. Like we
We don't.
teach grades, we teach academic
Mhm.
performance by remembering information, not how to be in the realm of information.
Yeah. I'd say it's not modeled. And if we look at this, we are the children of a world war.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And if we really let that land,
Mm-hmm.
war traumatizes.
Mm.
There's a significant impact
Mm.
to the individuals that were a part of it, and to the individuals that watched it.
Mm.
And there are, I mean, I make a blanket statement like the whole world is children of the war, but I mean, there are many different generations,
Mm.
pockets of generations that are living who are living as a result of the damage done. And the way that lives on from generation to generation without us being aware of it necessarily. It
Mm.
used to be part of our culture, at least here in the States, for there to be intellectual discourse.
Mm.
And I don't know about the UK. I'm imagining what I know about culture there,
Mm.
that was a huge part of things too.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look back over my own life, I think, when did that stop?
Mm.
And it wasn't a moment. It
Mm.
was gradual,
Mm-hmm.
where we're sensationalizing more ignorant forms of entertainment.
Mm.
We're really promoting more things that don't really have anything to do with expanding our mind, critical thinking,
Mm.
challenging ourselves,
Mm.
um, challenging our own thoughts or ideas.
Mm.
There's not much of that anymore.
Mm.
And that's not the cultural norm. It's
Mm.
not celebrated. And so we don't have the model. So of course we don't know how to do it.
Mm.
I say we, but I'm using that in a generalized sense.
Mm.
But of course, culture doesn't have the skills.
Mm.
Their parents aren't imbibing or imbuing the skills in them
Mm.
through their behavior.
Mm.
We have the MTV generation here in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
the Real Housewives of Jersey Shore. And that's not the two completely different shows that I combined
But
here.
why not? Because
Right.
like same trash.
Right. And what that is it's glamorizing ignorance.
And emotional outbursts as well.
Yes, trauma.
Right.
Right. So we have a culture of traumatized individuals who just don't know how to take care of themselves.
Mm.
And their only way of getting attention is by being bigger or being louder.
Yes.
And the attention that they so desperately need is love and care,
Mm.
acceptance,
Mm.
connection, intimacy, being celebrated in their uniqueness while also challenged to examine themselves and to grow. But we don't have that. That's not built into our culture in the same way.
Mm.
And I see people in the conservative party here in the United States that argue that it's a result of a lack of religion here in the States.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And I don't think that has much to do with it.
Mm-mm.
While we can see Christian ideals could mold a person in a way that might support certain behaviors, I don't think that that's the cause. I think it's really, even inside of many religions, we still see trauma. We still see an inability for people to be honest about their lived experience, a good modeling of parent to child, parental behaviors, social dynamics. And it's definitely not modeled in entertainment either.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I don't see a solution, but I do see the problem clearly.
Right. And I think that that's interesting because the solution at this moment in time is individuals choosing not to follow the norm.
Yeah.
I think because I think it can only be that right now. And I don't see the solution as standing from a different position and yelling at the problem going, can you see the problem here? Because we're just, again, perpetuating the issue.
Yeah. And I think we really need people inside the entertainment industry to speak up more about these kinds of things, which we see sometimes. We see some of them.
But it's not glamorizing their mental health conditions,
Correct.
which is what happens so much. It's not,
it's not sensationalizing anything.
Right.
It's not about the next big thing.
Yeah.
And media has become that too. What's the next big thing? The next big deal, the next emotionally charged situation, the thing we can talk about. But it's not that. If we live that way, we are burning our systems, and you could probably speak to that better than I can.
It becomes self-perpetuating because fear is a vibration that becomes habituated. It's a chemistry that becomes habituated.
Right.
And then you need to live in it because it's what's familiar, if not comfortable or safe. But what else do you know? And I think from a female perspective as well, and I can only speak from a female perspective, but when you see the people who end up in positions of fame, you see a specific physiology, a specific personality, and a specific way of being. No matter how artificial it is, you see that's what people celebrate. Okay, well, what's wrong with me then? And it becomes this vicious cycle that we can point out the flaws, we can point out the problem, speaking as the female populace can point out the issue, but we can't escape that vibrational quality of, oh, but if I was like that, I would have more attention, I would feel better about myself.
Yeah, this whole larger than life thing.
Yeah.
And that's just a fantasy.
But it's a monetary one as well, though, because the I don't know, the Kardashians are very rich. But there is just this sense of where's reality in reality TV? Where is the reality? Because it isn't real.
No, it's not real. No. Most of those situations are scripted, and there's, there's a production team, there's a crew, there's a camera following people around. Those are not moments. I mean, there are spontaneous moments, of course, but there's a camera crew there. That has an impact.
It's Schrodinger's cat.
Right.
Why do you think people find that entertaining or fascinating? Well, what's the draw? What's the pull? Because I can easily I can switch on Real Housewives of whatever and actually be quite entertained by something for 5 minutes. I mean, I'm never going to watch a series, but do you think the draw is? Do you know?
I don't know. We are creatures that are fascinated by watching ourselves. But the drawback to that is that we emulate. Not even consciously.
Of course, we mirror.
Yep. And so when we're spending time immersed in reading sensationalized media, watching certain kinds of television, we take that on and we begin to emulate those reactions to situations, those behaviors, and we think that way. There's the inevitable byproduct of that. We become that which we take in. It's just like with food, our cells become, a byproduct of the food. We become a byproduct of that which we take in.
I love that, because that is the nourishment piece, which takes nourishment beyond food or fuel into absolutely everything that you bring into your realm is feeding you in some way. It's influencing you.
It is. Well, that kind of reminds me, because I shared this quote in our conversation yesterday, but in the way that our body's taking in and digesting the situations, the surroundings, the circumstances that we find ourselves in, there's a way that we're responding to all of that as well. And who we're becoming or who we imagine ourselves to be is then changing as a result of this that we're taking in. We are organic matter. We're growing in response to things, to our situations. And why is the world the way it is? Because it's the way it is. It's a circular answer. How do we change it? People of influence need to be willing to support us in directing our attention elsewhere. At least that's one simplistic answer. I think it's far more complicated than that. It needs to be, and this is a question that I'm asking in, the foundation that I created, but how do we affect this change? How do we support humanity to do something about this? Because I think it really is problematic to us, to our evolution, to our growth or development. Maybe said a different way instead of calling it evolution. But what do we do? Well, there needs to be a different way of. We need to parent our children differently. We need to interact with each other socially differently. We need to be more tolerant and more accepting of each other. And when we are more tolerant and accepting of each other, then we can be more connected. We're far more connected technologically than we've ever been in the history of humanity, and yet we're far more disconnected and isolated. Suicidality is at an all-time high. And depression, and people they're in these little boxes really close to each other, and nobody knows each other. And so I'd like to see that change. That has to somebody's got to lead the charge on that.
And it's, for me, there's that element of, in order to be able to lead the charge, you have to reflect and understand that there's a problem. And I think that the issue that I see is that many people that I see as positions of power or influence don't recognize it as a problem because they are already in a position of power or influence. So to them, the machinery that got them to where they are is the very one that we're pointing at and saying is broken.
Right.
And that is a catch-22 situation as well.
Well, we have people who are afraid of not having enough, making decisions for people who have more than they need.
Say that again.
Yeah, we have people who are afraid of not having enough, making decisions for people who have more than they need. And so the one mindset is affecting the way the other person or other even business is expressing itself in the world.
Sure.
Right?
I think that's so just relevant in terms of the feedback loops that happen. You know, it's so obvious when you slow down and point it out to people, but you show up with someone in conversation in a responsive way to the way they show up with you. You can't not.
Right.
If you go to the grocery store, you make the decision as to whether you're going to interact with a clerk based on how you're feeling that day, how they look. Do they actually, slightly different here because in America, they are actually paid to be nice to you, whereas they're not in the UK. No, seriously, it's a whole thing. I start packing my own bags here and people are like, oh, thank you. And I'm like, sorry, I just can't let you do it for me. It's a thing. But there is that sense of we're always responding.
Right.
We are responding animals. We have to, because we are trying to keep safe. You know, we're trying to get by, get through, be in the right tribe, sense where we're supposed to be.
We're social creatures.
Yeah. And that has a micro and a macro impact in terms of the people who are making the decisions, the people who are making the decisions about what media gets made, about what news gets communicated, about the narrative and the mindset of the mainstream. And when I look at the last few years, I just look at fear.
Absolutely. And I think that, of course, I mean, how could we not be afraid? Having been, that is what has been, what I want to say is that that's what we've all been force fed.
Yeah.
But it is what's been available to us to hear, unless we've gone looking elsewhere. But all the major media outlets, at least here in the States, I don't know about the rest of the world, are reporting something similar. And the fear that's been there, that has, I mean, like that, people see the world through those eyes.
Well, and my colleagues in the functional medicine space and me, we have all seen an increase in autoimmune disease. We have this long COVID thing, which I would argue is not necessarily just to do with any kind of viral load. There is a whole element of the metabolic response to the environment as a whole, not just the viral load that came in at one point. We have so many increases of adverse reactions to various things that were never adversely reacted to before. And, you know, business is booming from a functional medicine perspective, which is a terrible reality.
Yeah, it is a terrible reality when the medical industry is the industry that's making the most money right now. Well, that's a signal that something's off, something's out of whack, off kilter.
And we're all like, oh, yay, people are finally realizing that we exist. And I keep saying to my colleagues, this is never the way we wanted people to find out. One of there's 4 P's in functional medicine. I forget what most of them are. But one of the main ones is prevention. Functional medicine was designed as preventative medicine. We are more often than not fixing the problems of trauma of varying kinds or many kinds.
Right.
And that has seen so much increase in the last few years. And not just because of an actual virus, but because of the themes that were in people's minds. I lost count of the amount of conversations I had where people were just asking me to make them feel okay again about the world.
Yeah, same. And the mental health community is a 6 months to a year-long waiting list for people to get in to see a counselor, to see a psychologist, psychotherapist. Body workers are full too. I mean, like that says something about the state of things. and this fear that has been everywhere for the past couple years,
Mm.
that has a significant physiological impact on us, right?
Mm.
When we're getting threat signals from everywhere that we listen, everywhere that we look,
Mm-hmm.
well, of course, there's a higher allostatic load. Of course, the body's responding the way it is. We
Mm-hmm.
see autoimmune conditions. How do we prevent this? Well, the world needs to be a little different so that we
Mm.
can stop the body from responding appropriately to a threat. And that's the thing.
Yes.
An appropriate response to this level of a threat globally
Mm-hmm.
would be for us to be terrified,
Mm-hmm.
would be for us to be oriented to the danger,
Mm-hmm.
to be ready at any time to run or to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that makes tons of sense.
Total sense. Yeah. And that's the place I have to stay in. Otherwise, I get upset at the world. I get frustrated at the world. I get angry at people who are my friend circle, who are on one polar extreme of this argument or the other,
Mhm.
mostly one, for a particular polar extreme. But there's just that reality that we are not in normal times. And yet,
Mhm.
I don't think we're going back to what we consider normal either.
No, we're not. I mean, we can't. This change has happened, and now it's a matter of how do we change this? This theme of disorganization to create new organization that we were talking about. And I don't know if our listeners will ever hear that conversation or not.
We
but,
can reveal the secrets later, but yes, carry
but
on.
yes,
Will.
so in order for some sort of change to happen, we have our current organizing structure. We have the current way that we organize, the current strategies that we have to do what we're doing, whether that be, some like sense of moving, the way that we organize our body for movements. It doesn't matter, but any number of those things, right? In order to change that, we've got to confuse what is happening. We've got to disorganize that so that something new can happen.
Mm.
Well, we had a big event around the world that shook things and changed the way that we all lived. Now we have a new way that we've been orienting to the world. So we have to shift that again. If we want to see it change, there's going to be more shakeup of sorts. I don't know how that's going to take place or if it will.
Are you ready for me to make this a bit weird?
Let's do it.
Okay, we're going to go weird. So in human design realms,
Yeah.
Since 1986, the founder of human design spoke of 2027. He could see, was told, whatever language you want to use, there was a real element of there will be a change. It's a part of you'll understand this language, precession of the equinox in terms of the way things are moving. And in 2027, we actually shift from what has been a very fifth line phase into a sixth line phase. So fifth line is all structures and institutions and structure and organization and literally the infrastructure. And sixth line is about being the role model. And we are shifting into that realm, supposedly. And there will be a breakdown. So anyone who's in human design has understood from the beginning of our training the way the nine-centered being in human design is going to change. Now, whether you believe that or not, when I sit down with human design old guard and we have this conversation, that's what we see. We see this destruction of being able to trust the people in charge, actually having any respect for authority, the nature of relating changing. So that whole need to seek community through relationship is shifting. And the breakdown of marriage contracts into being much more community oriented, and various elements of the chart that people who know human design will actually fathom. But I see that happening. And the whole development of the other thought process of this was the birth of the kind of rave children is what they were called, but we can see it with the people that are called indigo children or rainbow children, all those sorts of things. Yeah. It's the progression towards that where the sensitivity to the environment is entirely different. And the way of communing is different. And I have no answers. I'm just laying this out there and going into weird territory because it's interesting to me. It's like, and we all thought 2027 was miles away when I started learning this 20 years. Well, it was 20 years away.
It was 20 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
But now it feels like, whoa.
Well, and I see a necessity because it's really necessary for us to be more sensory sensitive.
Yes.
It's 100% more necessary in our world right now.
Yes.
So of course the children that are born, they come into this world more sensitive. Their body grows in a different way. It's needed for it to grow in a different way. Yeah. What do we do? And it's interesting because I'm imagining, and I'm not as connected to astrology as I used to be, but I imagine there's probably a planet that's also shifting around that same time frame.
Yes.
And there's so many overlays between these two schools of
It is
thought.
planetary in terms of it will have come from the planetary transition. I
There we
just
go.
don't know
Yeah.
what. But
Okay.
yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
That makes sense. Well, and it'll be interesting to see how that takes place.
And I think that's the question that keeps coming to my mind is, do I just sit back and watch? Or what do I do? Like, because there are real people who expect me to have some kind of response. And I'm like, what do you want me to say? Like, and I have a very small social media following, but I have a very loyal social media following. And when big things happen, there's this anticipation that I comment on stuff like social affairs. And I've never done that. I didn't do that in Brexit, or I lived in Africa. I didn't comment on the political corruption there. I'm not going to comment on American politics because I'm not an American citizen. But it feels like, okay, so how far can not saying anything get me? Where to use my energy is the question that I have.
Yeah, well, and it's a good question, Victoria. How much do we get involved? How much do we say? How do we say it? Where do we put our energy? And this is something that I've really given a lot of thought to, because I have a lot of opinions about certain current events. And I'm not yet choosing to throw those opinions into the foray at the moment. But where I put my attention is supporting individuals to come into greater regulation inside themselves, and supporting leaders to be in greater regulation in themselves, so that then ripples out to the people that they're leading, so that they live through the example. They're the living embodiment of this change that I see necessary for our world. But I also think that there do need to be those of us who are willing to be speaking out about this. And there are many people who've chosen to be deplatformed as a result of this throughout the last 3 years or so. They had their social media accounts stripped away. They've been blacklisted from an assortment of different places because they're speaking out about what they believe is right. And we do need those people. That's not me. Not in that way. But I think that we can still do good without jumping into a battle with people about it.
I think that's it. Yeah. I think a lot of the deplatforming was happening. Well, this was my perspective, that the deplatforming, some of it was completely uncalled for, but some of it was because people went to battle. People were like trying to throw stones back. I've always been, I mean, my statement when I went into healthcare, which I never intended to do, but was not, I want to yell against conventional medicine. It saved my life on multiple occasions. But to create an alternative that people could find and could seek, that would stand separately, but could be another mountain for people to walk towards.
That's it. Well, and I think when I think about it, people ask me about this. I say, well, I'm going to be the beacon. Jesse Elder has a really great analogy. Do you want to be a tugboat or a lighthouse? And this analogy is phenomenal, right? The tugboat goes out all day long and works really hard, but it requires an enormous amount of energy. It tugs boats around that are, 10 to 100 times bigger than it. And I'm making an exaggeration. It's probably not physically accurate, but much, much larger than the tugboat is. It draws things in. It works that way. But the lighthouse just shines its light and boats find it. Right. And so we have the opportunity, we can be the lighthouse, the living embodiment of a different way, which then people are drawn to, like a moth to a flame, and that helps to guide them as well. And so I think there are other ways of accomplishing a similar goal.
Yeah. Well, and to extend that analogy, that the lighthouse doesn't like yell, it's the best lighthouse on the island, so please come towards this one. It just shines its light. It's not saying that lighthouse is terrible over there, come to me. It's basically going, this is the truth that I am embodying.
That's right.
And this is the light that I'm shining. And therefore, if you resonate with this, here I am.
Yeah, it doesn't need to prove anything.
Yeah.
The thing about the tugboat is that every night it needs to go get refueled. But the lighthouse doesn't need that. Right? And this is the brilliance of Jesse's mind here with this analogy. I think it's great. And he uses it for sales, he uses it for marketing, he uses it for all sorts of things. But I think, it also is true for those of us who are the living embodiment of something different. When people are around us, they feel the difference. It's contrasted against those who maybe say the words. It's contrasted against those who are living differently. And it invites them into feeling differently inside themselves. Right? And you and I have created trainings that help to hopefully pass this on to others. And again, how do we help the world? We help the leaders of the world.
And that's a beautiful thing to bring up, actually, because obviously I've been through your training and I watch the people that come through, and for the most part they are the healers of the world
Hmm.
who are adding to their skill set and becoming supremely aware of trauma and different ways to be in their own bodies. But that's what I witnessed, that
Yeah.
personal transformation was universal in the cohort that I
Hmm.
went through. I'm sure it's universal in all of the cohorts, that then has the byproduct of influencing every element of their work.
Yeah. 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 And that seems to be the case.
Mm,
It was the case for me when I started experiencing somatics
mm,
or somatic experiencing,
mhm.
and these people that offer this, they really are living
Living
differently.
differently. Well, and the beauty of that is that it has influenced my training, because
Hmm.
I've built it. Well, it was being built before I joined trauma and somatics, but there has been such a difference in me as I've worked with you, as I studied trauma and somatics, that I know that the students that come through my training, again, I'm training healing professionals, complex systems healing professionals, will have a totally different approach to humans than any other person that I know, because not only am I giving the information, but I'm different. I'm being different with people.
Yeah. Yeah, you are. And the again, right? We emulate what we experience when we're with another. We
Mm.
don't emulate the words that they use to tell us what to do,
Hmm.
right? We're far more monkey than we are, you know, you know, industrialized human
Yeah.
in a way. What I mean by that is we're more, animal than we think we are.
Yeah.
And the emulation really is the behavior. It's not what somebody says,
Sure.
right? Like I can teach you material all day long, but that material is only as good as if you really want to learn from me, you're learning how I behave.
Yeah. And I think sometimes I observe, but particularly in our coach client relationship, I observe a behavior in you and I ask you the thing behind it, but
Mm,
that's to help my mental cognitive understanding of something that I have witnessed from my animal self.
that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. How do we be the embodiment of that change in the
Hmm.
world, right?
Mm.
Uh, it's cliche, be the change you wish to see in the world, right? And yet there is some truth to that. When
Right.
I'm the living embodiment of it, it's not a thing I'm thinking about doing.
Mm.
It's who I am.
Hmm. I think
Right.
people misunderstand that quote all the time, though. I
I
think
think so.
they think it means speak about the change you wish to see in the world
Yes. Yes. Yes.
rather than be it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and being the change means I'm not out there trying to change the world.
Oh, that's good. Yes.
It means I'm attending to me.
Yeah.
I'm attending to working on my triggers. I'm attending to, and not working on. I say that because
Yeah.
there's not a good turn of phrase for it. But what I mean is, I'm learning about the things that trigger a response in me.
Hmm.
I'm feeling it. I'm kind of I'm better understanding it. I'm
Hmm.
helping myself to process those things so that that's not front and center when I'm interacting with other humans.
Yeah.
Somebody can criticize me and I can listen to them.
Mm.
I can hear them.
Mm.
Like how many times does it happen where criticism,
Mm.
critical words are used to describe another person and that person just has a meltdown. They're
Mm.
emotional. They're ashamed. They're
Yes.
angry.
Yeah.
They lash out.
Yes.
How many people in your life can you actually give feedback to about themselves?
Right.
I mean, there aren't that many.
No, there really aren't.
Mhm.
And and I, I have my own way of receiving feedback as well, but that's evolved over time. And that essence of um, being able to take feedback, I think, is a lost art.
I think so too.
I think the ability to give it is also a lost
It
art.
is. I think so too. I love watching Jordan Peterson in debates
Hmm.
for this very reason. What I see modeled in him during debates, and I don't know him in his personal life, so I can't speak to him in his personal life, but what I can speak to is the way that he's able to debate.
Mm.
He listens to a person giving feedback, criticism, and it might be really tearing down his character in a not so delicate way.
Mm.
And he listens, he takes it in, and he gives a response, a very well thought out response,
Mm.
one that doesn't demean or tear down the person who's verbally attacking him, maybe
Mm-hmm.
we could say. But he listens.
Mm.
And then he offers a very thought out response.
Mm.
That's an art.
Yeah.
To be able to not get emotionally involved
Yeah.
in a conversation that really, involves a person
Being
saying something
emotional.
about
Yeah.
saying something about our character.
Yeah.
That's a skill. And there's an art to it for sure.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of art and entertainment, like I was watching a terrible Netflix show, which I'm not even going to mention the name of last night. But in one episode, there was both of the examples that we've just spoken about. So there was an argument about white fragility, as in a white male had made a comment that was completely inappropriate about a black male in the office. And essentially the person who was offended said they were offended, and the white male was like, oh, but we're being sensitive. And it was all, well, this is white fragility. And I was trying to keep up, and I'm quite an intellectual person. And I was like, hang on, where's this going?
Mm-hmm.
And then the white male who'd made the comment then did a comedy skit, like sending up the white fragility. It was so PC, but it was also done very tongue in cheek. And I was like, hang on a second, we're showing this as an example to people.
Interesting.
And then the second thing that happened was there was like a hippie commune thing, and this lawyer turns up and is herself, and then she speaks her truth and says, you're sponging off this person. And they go, there's a pause moment, and then the hippie commune people start clapping and say, thank you for speaking your truth. And I was like, this is what's wrong with the world. We've got people who are so accepting, in inverted commas, of other people speaking their truth, but none of it's real. And then we've got people who are so up in their feelings that they are so triggered by everything that nothing is real.
Yeah. Yep. And we're not doing anything to help people. We're accommodating people, one thing or the other, or we're getting angry or defensive, or we're having an emotional response because a person's saying something about something. Yeah. It's a wild thing.
Yeah.
And, kind of coming full circle back to this discussion, really, where's the model for this? We don't have a really good model. We don't have a number of good models like we used to. When I was young, we had a lot of models, even on television, of academic, or not academic, but intellectuals who would speak and debate and have conversations that had different opinions. There'd be very real arguments in the real definition of an argument, and there'd be debates, and they'd be charged, but it wouldn't be emotionally resorting to cutting a person down. It was different.
Well, and just to sort of comment on that as well, like, again, this is all secondhand from my mother's updates from the UK, but there was a breakfast show recently that's actually renowned as being a Sunday morning newspaper review, let's look at what's happening in the modern world sort of show. And a comedian went on and was basically doing a satirical send-up, completely in character, being very right-wing or whatever, supporting the new person who's been, and like nobody got it, but also it was like, or people did get it and thought it was amazing. But all I could think was, hang on a second, when I left the UK, this was intelligent people having intellectual debate about the way news was being reported in various different tabloid and broadsheet newspapers. What has happened?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And what we're really in trouble when we can't laugh at ourselves.
yes.
Yeah, we can't talk about things for what they are.
Yes. Or we can't have a joke that's sort of tongue in cheek and like.
And here's the other thing, Victoria, we have whole systems in the social justice movement that are built up to protect people's feelings, to protect people from feeling bad, right? Even in the field of being trauma informed, right? And so this is something that I bump into sometimes, where it's, well, we need to protect people from their emotions, from their triggers. And it's not that we want to protect them from their triggers. It's that we want to be mindful that triggers are there, that we want to be sensitive to the response, and we want to support a person to feel connected in the midst of their trigger, so that they know, oh, it's okay for them to feel what they're feeling. We're still here. We recognize the impact of the behavior, and we can meet them in that. But it's not that I need to. There's no possible way I could move through the world and protect everybody from feeling triggered about my words or my actions. I can be kind, though, right? I can be kind. I can be attentive to others.
And it's like, well, hang on a second. With all this PC stuff, we're essentially trying to stop people feeling bad, which means we're stopping people from allowing their full emotional expression, which means we're stopping people from feeling.
And we're also teaching people that somebody else is responsible for their feeling state.
Right.
And this is a thing that
Yes.
happens early for us as humans. Tommy apologized to Sally for making her cry, for making her sad, for making her scared. I talk about this with people all the time, and some people have a really hard time even just wrapping their mind around this concept. You made me feel this way. No, I took an action, and you had a feeling response to that action. I'm not referring to abuse, right? What I'm referring to is something happened and you had a response. Now, I want to know that that response happened inside you because that's the impact of my behavior. But I didn't create or generate the feeling inside of you. Your body generated that in response. And this is a subtle distinction, but it's really, really, really important. I can't make you feel a certain way. I can do a thing that may stimulate a feeling in you. Well, we move through the world thinking we can make other people feel a certain way. We also move through the world blaming others for our feelings. And then we're powerless to the feeling when it comes up. So what do we want to happen? We want the world to change so we're not feeling bad anymore. And so we now have systems built so that we have to accommodate others in their feelings instead of supporting them to learn how to be with their feelings and to separate those things out. Right. And this is where I think debate is falling apart because we can no longer debate. It's all just,
Mudslinging.
yes, mudslinging. That's a really good way of saying it. That's it though.
And this is interesting as well, because just to be personal, we had a situation yesterday. I left, a load of feelings came up. It was a situational, logistical thing, but feelings came up in me.
Yep.
And I watched myself be different in it. And I have done for the last few weeks, if not months, be different in it, not thinking I need to find the cause of those feelings, whether it's a person or a situation. It's just X happened. I am feeling X. What do I need? Not who do I need to go and attack because of this situation?
Not whose fault is this?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, exactly.
And then being able to have a conversation about it where, and actually to be clear, some stuff needed to come out. And I yelled at my mum on the phone this morning. Excellent. Not about people or things, but just about this is what I'm feeling.
That's it.
Not, and it's this person's fault or this situation's fault or any of those things.
And sometimes the first layer is I'm really angry at so-and-so. I'm angry that they're doing this thing and why are they doing this thing? And I'm feeling this way. Oh, I'm feeling this way. I'm angry. I'm feeling this way. I need to be with the feeling. I was able to get it out. I could talk about it. Oh, now I can feel it. The feeling can pass. It's not the other that created the feeling. It's something in me. This is one of the things I love about Anthony DeMello's lecture. It was turned into a book called Awareness. And the feeling is in you. It's not in the world. Right? When we recognize that the feeling is in us, right, not in the other person, something happens. And can I be with that feeling in me? That's hard. We don't practice that. I want it to stop. Make it go away. Make it go away. Change your behavior so that I stop feeling this way. If only the government would be different, I wouldn't have to feel oppressed. If only the world would change, I could feel better. If only all those people didn't have privilege, I could get ahead. If only I had more money, life would be better. Right? If only people would get out of poverty, the world could be equal. Right? We have these polarizing perspectives, but we're not turning that towards ourselves and saying, well, if only I was different, I could be in the world the way it is. And that's important. If I could be different, and I could be in the world the way it is, I'm not going to be running around yelling at anybody, that's for sure.
It's beautiful. And I love that you kind of ran through those examples, because those are real things people say. And it gives our power away, literally puts power outside of us when we make other people responsible for our feelings.
It does. And there are very real examples of situations that are out of our control where we've been abused. Somebody's done something horrible to us, and we did not have any control over that set of circumstances or those situations. And it was awful. And it wasn't our fault. The feeling still happened inside of us, and it was at the hand of another.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And those are awful situations and circumstances. Those are absolutely awful. And they shouldn't happen. But they do happen because we're not in touch with ourselves. Poor parenting, a lack of supportive culture, and so on and so forth down the line. We can explore all those things. And those are different situations than what we're talking about here. Like, it's very different.
And to be clear, when you say we're not in touch with ourselves, you mean on behalf of the perpetrator as opposed to the victim?
Both. Yeah. Very much so. The perpetrators.
Yeah.
Perpetrators are people who have lived a life that's led to them acting out or behaving in that way. And most of them were significantly abused. There are very small percentages of abnormal brain development that leads to what we would call personality disorders, which is just a different structure of brain function. And then that leads to a different structure of behavior and thinking and so on and so forth. But that's a much smaller percentage than we might think. And the rest of it is a product of our circumstances. A family whose parents were not parented well. They didn't have resources. They were stressed. They used substances to cope with the stress of their lives. And that came out with poor emotional regulation, neglect or abuse of the child. The child grows up in an environment of neglect and abuse. What happens? Their personality structure forms, and their response to the world forms as a result of those particular things. They go out into the world and they respond to the world in a way that's very aggressive or intense. They have expectations that the world will meet their needs, but when they didn't get their needs met, they're angry that they didn't get their needs met, and they take it out on the world. And of course they do. Like, fuck. Why not? They don't know any different.
Well, and what else is available to them?
That's it. How else could they possibly behave?
Yeah.
They haven't had kindness and love, nurturing, and support. They haven't been given any of those things from their environment because their parents weren't able. And of course they weren't able, given the circumstances that they were living in. Right. And we can keep tracing this back on and on and on and on and on.
Sure. And I think this is why we have so many connection points, because no matter where we go and what problems we observe and things we kind of look to, we keep getting back to a traumatized society.
That's it. I think that is the underlying issue. That's the sickness that I believe is destroying us slowly as a species. And it's a really bold statement to make, I know. But I truly believe that it's an invisible virus of sorts that has permeated generations. It's a thing that we can't always point to the cause of, but we know the symptoms well, and we don't know how to prevent it from happening. Nor do people have the skills to meet this problem, right? Or the infection from this disease. And if we thought about trauma as a disease, boy, it would be a different story. We'd be looking at it differently. We'd be attending to it differently. We would be treating it differently. But I think it's systemic, and I think it's permeated culture across our planet. We're not paying attention to it that way. We're not looking at it that way.
Yet,
yeah. When was there a time when war was not a part of life?
And just you saying, we are the children of war. My mum was born in 1946. So,
yeah,
seriously, like, just
right there in it.
Right there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really been hitting me as we've had this conversation. I keep going back to that and just thinking, wow, because the generations, the change we have seen in this, 76 years since then.
And the threat to survival that people were living with then, in a way similar to the threat to survival we're living with right now. Different, of course.
But when you talk about energy poverty, which is where we started in the energy crisis, not having enough money to pay for your essential electricity, the ability to cook your meals, keep yourself warm.
Yeah. Basic human needs.
Basic human needs. We're right. It's so very primitive in terms of threat.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't see an endpoint, except the reality of this is that, this is an energy crisis while the energy companies are retaining their profit margins.
Yeah, and I think, we could go down the rabbit hole and looking at some of the problems, just like with anything, we follow the money and we can figure out what's going on with those things.
But again, that's a trauma thing.
Again, it is.
Because money is what we grab onto to feel safe when we don't feel safe elsewhere, because it feels like it's the safest thing.
It's a resource, right? We don't hunt and gather food anymore. We hunt and gather money so that we can gather food, right? Hunting and gathering so that we could create or build a shelter, right? We are no longer doing those things. We hunt and gather money. Like that is the thing that we're hunting. That's the thing that's a survival need, right? Just like food used to be. But food is a thing that we can come by pretty easily now with mass transit or industrialization moving across the planet. Now, there are plenty of people that would argue with me right now and say, hey, watch out. There may be food shortages coming on. I don't know. Maybe there will be. Who knows? But right now, what I do know is that money is that one commodity that all of us need for survival, unless we live in an area of the world where we can just live off the land. Mm-hmm. And there's increasingly fewer and fewer places that we can do that.
Mm-hmm. So if we keep coming back to trauma as the problem,
mm-hmm.
do you want to talk a little bit about your nonprofit, just to discuss a little bit of what you're thinking in terms of discovering solutions?
Well, our mission is to research this, is to do a large scale research study, and it's like more sociological in nature probably. To work with researchers in a multitude of countries. We'll start with just a few countries to begin with and then expand that across the world to better understand what's leading to this problem. We have some questions that we want to answer. How does trauma form in people? How does that take place in one culture versus another? Where are the threads of sameness? Where are the differences? So that we can know how to interrupt that. And we're still in the very beginning stages of this. We're formulating our questions and we're in conversations with experts, kind of presenting our ideas to them, and we'll begin a round of funding probably next year.
And the thing I love about the sound of the way you're structuring the foundation and the thought process about it is it has to be brilliant minds in a room having conversations, which is exactly what we've been talking about is missing. And it's almost like the people who go towards solving the problem that we're discussing have to be people who are capable of seeing the complexities and the dilemmas when it comes to triggered conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all need to be able to share our perspectives and debate them and really hold that contrast of my thoughts are different than your thoughts and your perspective is different than mine. And I need to be challenged to like a rigorous challenging discussion and where we really kind of pull things apart and examine them. Is this the way that humans fundamentally behave? Well, is this a way that we might support them? No, yes, no, yes. There's going to be so many degrees of debate about these different things, especially from specialists who've been studying humans for their whole lives, because everybody's going to have a slightly different lens that they're looking through and a slightly different perspective. But yeah, I believe you're right. We do need to bring people together, and they need to be from different cultures on our planet. Much like we have the UN, where's a place where different governmental, leaders come together to discuss problems in the world. We do need a place like that where scientists and researchers and academics can come together and to discuss what we're going to do about humans. Right.
Not nations,
not the political stuff, but like the very real, like the sociological, like psychological components of humans. Because we're just barreling through the world, imprinting thing after thing on our young with no awareness of what we're doing or how that might have an impact on the longevity of our species. And that's the part that I'm most interested in. And I think trauma is one of the biggest, most problematic diseases that we're dealing with as a species that I think is just continuing to ripple from generation to generation to generation. That's having an impact that's often invisible, right? With health conditions that have like unexplainable things that just seemingly show up out of nowhere. No, they're not coming out of nowhere. Like there's absolutely a reason for that. And it's a really like logical, brilliant response to generations of stress. Well, if we know that that's true, maybe we can support ourselves to behave differently. But I think there are going to be ways that that's going to be difficult. As a white man with enough money and enough resources right now in my life, I can have these conversations and I can look at these things. But if I didn't have what I have, it'd be very hard for me to be taking a look at these things or even think about how to be resourced enough to take care of myself, let alone take care of children and let alone take care of a family and so on and so forth. So I think there are greater problems that we all face. And when we learn how to be with ourselves, being in stressful experiences can be also a thing that we learn how to do.
But the thing is that the financial element of this, we will bankrupt every nation on the planet treating the diseases as a result that emerges as a result of trauma long before we will cease to exist as a species. So it sort of seems worth investing the money up front in resolving the problem, not spending a lot of money resourcing ourselves to have therapeutic avenues against the symptoms.
Yeah, and I think that there will be people for as long as people are here that are working on the symptoms of problems. But I do think that it's important, it's essential for us as creatures, as a species, to have people that are working to prevent those problems from ever happening. Which is very much a functional medicine approach in a way.
It is. And I think it is how it started from an illness perspective. But very few people in functional medicine get to where I got to, which is, hang on a second, we're not even talking about the same thing here.
Yeah.
Like I am very adamant that everything that I was treating was trauma-based as well. And I kind of got there in a different direction to maybe knowing enough about trauma or somatics or any of those things. But I got there from sheer reductionist first principles of, hang on, like, it can be nothing else.
Right.
But a lot of functional medicine practitioners stop still at the system level. And, you know, it's better than conventional medicine.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. But it can just turn into being a green pharmacy. But it's not a deficiency of Oregon grape that you're dealing with.
No, it's not.
Like, it's not a deficiency of like glutathione. There's other problems happening. And there is a real need for us to, I think, as healthcare professionals, to recognize that there is more going on than just, you know, flaws in the human physiology.
Yeah, and we don't need to give somebody to add something into their system to fix it. You and I were having a conversation yesterday afternoon when you were reading my genetic profile, and I think we were talking about this, right? It's like, let's just keep adding things in. Let's just add this other thing in. Let's add a hormone in. Let's add a supplement in. Why? And why is the system deficient in those things? Like we want to understand these things. Sure, we can bolster it up and we can give it something, but that doesn't solve the thing that's causing the deficiency in the first place. And maybe it's a byproduct of the genetics. The organism had a really intelligent reason for that.
1,000%. And this is why I kind of got into genetics and then kind of came out of it quite quickly, because it's like every genetic profile I ever read, there was balance to the imbalance. So there was something that seemed to be a flaw and something that was compensating. It was like, oh, this seems to be an intelligent creation. Did I actually need to know certain things? Very rarely is it useful.
Right.
Like I can speak to this. I have a genetic disorder, which is literally in my genes. I make weird collagen. That helps me not at all, because I can't take anything to fix that. And so when we look at those genetic reports and the supplementation stuff, the conclusion sentence for you was something like, just take a really good multivitamin, which is like, that's great. And with a few bits extra, and a few bits extra based on the lifestyle things that have happened on top.
Right.
And a few things that didn't make any sense to you because of the lifestyle things that have happened on top.
That's right.
And when I used to recategorize the word stress to my clients. And I was like, this is stressors, things that are too much for the human system.
Right.
Anything that the human system couldn't cope with at the moment it was exposed to it. And now I know that that's literally the definition of trauma, but I was just using it from a sheer kind of like, here's your system. You dumped a load of this on it, whether it's a toxin or a life experience, or usually both, or usually the toxin comes after the life experience and then suddenly the system doesn't have the ability to just detoxify the thing. There's so many realities to this, which are just similar when it comes to getting back to, it's just too much for a system. Something was too much for a system.
Yeah. The difference between a medicine and a poison is dosage and frequency,
Mm. Yeah.
right? And so we can have a good thing, but if we have too much of the good thing, it no longer is supportive.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer a good thing,
Mm.
right? And yeah,
Mm.
if my system's overwhelmed and I have a really significant life circumstance that's stressful,
Mm-hmm.
the stress load is higher on my body. Well, if I'm not sleeping well enough for, a couple months in a row,
Mm.
and I have repetitive exposure to environmental toxins,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I have a predisposition for a weakness to these toxins
Mm-hmm.
that would never ordinarily wouldn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just say there's chronic stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have the loss of a parent or a loved one,
Mm-hmm.
or I get sick with some sort of virus.
Mm.
Well, if we combine all these things together, well, of course, there's a breakdown in the system. The system just isn't strong enough to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm.
Well, we see that everywhere right now,
Mm.
where all sorts of people at the same time are experiencing similar stressors at the same, it's like compounded effect of all of these things. Of course, people are stressed.
And community is missing.
Yep.
So in my functional medicine career, without any exception, and I've spoken about this with my colleagues as well, the people who had loved ones around them whilst they were going through chronic illness had remarkably different outcomes to those who didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who did it as a family, whether I was recommending a specific diet to someone because they needed to stay off allergens for a while or whatever it was, the people who did it as a family or had friends who were going to cook for them or do something with them, radically different results.
Yeah. Well, because it's a biological need, connection or safe connection, right? To be connected with others, to be loved, to belong. Like, these are needs that we have as an organism. I when I grow inside of mom, I am mom until I'm somehow not, right? And then I begin to create a unique form, right? I need mom for survival. And I also need community for survival. That doesn't stop just because I can wipe my own ass or I can feed myself. Right? It doesn't stop because I can create money or because I can care for my basic needs. It continues on. Like, it is a fundamental part of who I am and how I grow as an organism. Now, I keep coming back to this like biological perspective, right? And most of the world orients to us as though we were created. Even a lot of scientists talk about, the way the body was created. It's the way we grow. Sure, we can layer on the myth and we can layer on religion, and that's great. And yet, even with religion,
we still have to grow.
Yeah. It's objective. We can see it.
Well, we all know that we're aging,
right?
But we don't contemplate that that's a change.
Yeah.
We just think it's a deterioration, and it's not. It's an evolution.
Yes. We're growing to the point of our end. And even in the ending, there's growth. As, we're dying.
And I think one of the interesting things that came to me as you were speaking is like, it's spoken about certainly in Austin, but maybe not everywhere, of the fourth trimester after birth. But there's actually science done on how the energy is still connected between mum and baby.
Yeah.
And that we're not even nurturing right now in the population.
Yeah.
It's like, shove the thing in a crib from day one. It's like, what? What?
Have a nanny, have somebody that comes to the house, takes care of baby, leave, go on vacation for a week or 2 weeks
Even
after
go
baby's
out
born.
for the night a couple of weeks later.
Go out for a night, drink alcohol, imbibe in substances, use psychedelics. The list goes on. But yeah, even go out for a night away from baby. That is an earth-shattering experience for baby who needs mom, who needs connection, who needs parent nurturing, right? If mom's not there, needs parent, needs someone to attune to.
My earliest memory is I fell down. We were being dropped off at a nanny. I was maybe 2 and 3-ish, and I fell and grazed my knees, and my mum had to go to work, so she takes me into the nanny and leaves me. I can still feel the energy of that moment of like abandonment,
fear,
right?
Fear,
coupled with pain, coupled with
being alone.
Yeah.
Pain, fear, and then that which I need to regulate, to soothe, is absent.
And this must be just I mean, I still feel that there are so many things ingrained in people. I see it in my clients where they're talking about a current life situation, and I'm like, that's not what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's not what we're talking about. Well, and even and it's really interesting, like even in the verbiage, right? So abandonment is our assessment about the fear that we feel when we're away from other, right? And I'm not saying that to criticize your language here at all, but like for the listener to like, it's really, really easy for us to create a psychological association. We have a word for describing the experience that we're experiencing, and yet it's not as detailed as we might be able to get if we really get down into it, right? There's the fear, because I experienced my own version of something like that at 12. I was terrified. I was without that which helped me to feel soothed. In that, I called that and labeled that abandonment. I was abandoned. But abandoning is an idea that describes a state, right? And that state, that fear state, like what solves that problem for us is having something or someone there, not something, but someone there that can help to soothe that. And it's a need, it's a biological need at that point in our lives. 3, 12, doesn't matter. Like, but either point in time, we still need that.
And abandonment attributes a judgment on the behavior of the person who walked away.
Yeah, exactly. And here we are again in the loop, which is an interesting psychological loop that we can all get into about this, right? Kind of coming full circle back around to that, like naming the thing that's happening inside of us versus labeling it based on our environment. And it's not that it's wrong to say that we were abandoned, we were left, we were alone, but the feeling, the emotion, the quality of that is fear. Right? It's I'm scared and I can't be with, I don't know how to do that. Like quite literally, baby does not know how to be afraid. Baby's scared. Baby needs soothing. Baby can't do that on its own.
No. And nor should it be expected to. And that's when I'm not saying that, yeah. And it feels like we are a different species. I do feel like we need to nourish ourselves as a species. And I do think it comes through what you've been talking about in terms of the communion and the talking about things and healthy debate and being able to have the conversations.
Yeah, and I think we need to be able to talk about reality for what it is too. Like, dear God. Right, like, I mean, like, but this is a real thing. This is a real issue in cultures, especially in the United States right now, but in many different cultures, we can't speak about reality for what it is because we end up, somebody's offended. But I think that's a dangerous place that we find ourselves in the world right now when we can't really name reality. And we're having to modify our language to help others to not feel something. Because and I say it's dangerous because what happens is there are landmines everywhere in conversation, and there's no way for me to know what's going to trigger you. And if I'm spending all of my time accommodating what I think might happen for you, then I'm not really able to communicate with you.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about this as building my training and building with the future vision of the academy and thinking how intentional, because I'm being very intentional, but I'm trying to navigate that barrier of like, I want to be intentional, but I don't want to be false. I don't want to create a construct of false inclusivity.
Right. Yeah.
And that for me is really important because of where I see the academy going and where I see what I'm building going in terms of having places where we can have like the Oxford College of old, where actually they had scholars talking about things. And what I find when we come into the contact with professionals who are in particularly the somatic space, people who are in the embodied space, as we were talking about earlier, that we don't need to have this conversation with them. They are very aware of their discipline, open and really willing to investigate the links between their discipline and the discipline that's slightly adjacent but has so many crossovers.
Yeah.
And those people, it's like I could just move in with them and spend all my time with them.
It's the embodiment of inclusivity. Right? It's not the concept of inclusivity.
Yes.
They're not modifying their language in a way. I'm making blanket statements. Many of them don't have to modify their language in that way because they are the embodiment of inclusivity, being, I accept you as you are. You are different than me. That's okay. It's great. And here's this thing that's a little bit different than what I do. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
There's benefit in this thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
similar to what I do in this way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, it's like that in the rest of the world.
Mm.
It's just we're not all behaving with that.
Yeah. I think we need a group of people who feel confident with idea sex, as in one great idea. But really, though, right? It's like we need people who can have that element of two minds are way better than one.
Yeah.
And lots of minds
are better than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and we all need to learn how to communicate in a way that allows for emotion to be present without it being projected onto others or taken on by others. There's a book I was reading by a man, and I don't remember his name now. Maybe we can link it in the show notes, but it was really useful. He does conflict resolution work, especially in group dynamics, and it's really fascinating work. Marshall Rosenberg's work with nonviolent communication really teaches us about this.
Yeah.
That I think that approach has been used in a formulaic way that kind of misses the essence of it.
Yeah.
Right? Empathy is really, I'm not so stuck in my trigger that I can't listen to you. Instead I'm really present with you, and I'm curious, and I'm understanding the impact of my behavior.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really lovely thing. I mean, if we were empathetic in that way and we weren't, stuck in our defensive's, well, of course we'd be connected.
Yeah, and we have recorded a podcast on nonviolent communication, which I'll link in the show notes, because we spoke about this in terms of the formulaic nature, but also what the formula was trying to get at underneath in terms of those sorts of things. So yeah.
Yeah. And I have somebody that might be a fun person for you to interview to talk about. His name's Pat Siebert. He's a Feldenkrais practitioner. Actually, I think you may have met him.
Yeah, I met him. He tickled my foot in a Feldenkrais session.
That sounds about
the
like
way
Pat.
to meet someone like that. Yeah,
Pat is a jester. I mean, in the essence of a jester. I mean, he really is. He's a phenomenal practitioner, and he's phenomenal with nonviolent communication. He studied with Marshall Rosenberg during his work. Yeah,
and this is what I mean. People who are like joining ideas together, taking one thing. People who are students of one person and then going to the next thing and bringing these concepts together. It's refreshing, actually. I have found it really refreshing about this space that we seem to occupy.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I think it's a thing that's missing, is that there's not a model or an example in leadership in that way as commonly in our culture, while it still does exist. Here we are. We spent a lot of time today talking about the problems and really highlighting them. And it's not to say that there aren't a lot of really wonderful and amazing human beings out there in the world that embody what we're talking about embodying more of. There are tons of leaders that are leading from a place of embodied integrity, that are leading from a place of connectedness, of community, of bringing people together, of, really that interconnection, safety, belonging it's almost like a tribal kind of thing, but not in a tribal sense, right? Inside of corporate environments, inside of educational environments. And these people do exist, and there are a lot of them in the world. What we really need to see is more of that in the public light.
Sure.
More publicity around these kinds of things.
Yeah. And it talked about more as well, about as being a necessary thing.
Yeah.
I think this is why you and I do what we do, and try to train the people we train, and try to build the things we build, and have the conversations we have.
Yeah. It's definitely why I created the training I created. And my hope is that translates to people through their experience of being more connected with themselves, more connected with their environment, and learning to be present with those that they love in a variety of circumstances. We begin our training with that quote from Anthony DeMello about, removing obstructions, which I shared during the first interview with you. And it really is that coming into contact with reality, experiencing the fullness of our aliveness. Life's meant to be lived, and that may sound cliche. It's a little one-liner, right? But it really is. And how can I live my life if I'm not connected to myself? If I'm disconnected from my body, I'm unaware of my, the things going on inside of me. How can I be connected with you? And how can I enjoy my experience of being alive? So many of us are fighting against living because of how miserable living is. And if, we say, well, notice yourself. Well, if I notice myself, I'll have to notice how uncomfortable I am in doing all the things I'm doing. I need to not notice myself so that I can go to the job I'm going to, so that I can work the kind of hours that I'm working, so that I can do this or that or the other thing. Yeah. Imagine if we all turned towards ourselves, we would be doing different things with our time and our lives. I'd like to see that happen for us in the world. I'd like to see the world doing more of what lights them on fire in a beautiful way. Like the creativity and the art that is possible to be expressed through us. Yeah.
And I think that it's really relevant because I said earlier about lots of healing professionals doing trauma and somatics, but I'd love to see lots of any professionals doing trauma and somatics, because there is such a value in being a different human, just humaning differently, being differently in your own skin, no matter what you're doing, no matter what your kind of line of work is.
Yeah, agreed. Well, so what an interesting conversation today, right? Quite a meandering from our beginning. And yet, where we began with the current event, I think really points to something deeper, and also points to our passion and why we're in this, in the work that we're in.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time to meander through this conversation with me. We will link to trauma and somatics in the show notes and make sure people can find the course, which this cohort closes on September 23rd.
23rd. We may keep it open till the 24th or 5th, but yeah.
That sort of time, and then another cohort beginning in January.
That's right.
Amazing.
Thanks for having me, Victoria.
Thank you. So, revealing some of the Unveil podcast secrets, this was the second full podcast recording Will and I did within the same week due to some technical errors. And I am so pleased we re-recorded that episode. The first one that you may hear at some point, or you may at least have some audio snippets from at some point, and it was a big deep dive into somatics. However, I am blown away by the level of conversation that Will delivers every time, especially when it comes to his observations on human behavior, human choices, and just the human condition in general. If you were inspired by anything we shared, please go seek Will out on the interwebs. His website and Instagram handle are linked in the show notes. And also Trauma and Somatics, which again, as we said during this episode, another cohort begins this September, closing registration around September 23rd. And if this is too soon for you, another cohort beginning in January, but again, linked in the show notes. And if education with the Unveil Academy is on the cards for you, you still have time to get in for the founding member cohort. Registration is almost closing. It is going to close on Sunday, the 18th of September at midday Central Time. If you are interested, have any questions, send me a DM on Instagram or send us an email to faculty@unveilacademy.com and we will answer any questions you have. Okay, with that, I have some amazing guests coming up on the Unveil podcast, everyone. Please like, subscribe, share anything that you find valuable with your friends, your colleagues, your loved ones. And we hope that you're truly finding value from all of these conversations that we have and the wisdom that my guests share.